All right, good morning, Marlena. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we jump into the interview, just want to kind of do a quick, I guess, caveat here for the listeners. This will be a great episode for you to listen to if you've been doing some video content for a little while, starting to kind of, get a little more confident on camera, and you really want to take your videos to the next level and make your videos even better, even more visually appealing. This might be a good interview for you if you are just getting started and you feel like you have no idea what you're doing, and hearing some advice, from an expert on the visual side of videos might make you feel more confident. Beware of this interview, though, if you're just getting started, the type of person who easily feels overwhelmed, because we're going to go through all sorts of different things you can do to make your videos better. And my fear is that if you're just getting started with this, you might take this as a massively long requirement list that you just can't meet. And that's not what this is at all. For your videos to be good enough, you need a cell phone, an arm, raise the cell phone maybe a few degrees above eye level, make sure you got some front-facing lighting hitting your face, and you're good enough. What we're talking about in this interview is taking good enough and taking it to that next level to make your videos even better. But if you're just now getting started, and if you tend to have the personality, where you tend to get overwhelmed by things, maybe this would be the best episode for you, right? Because again, you should not look at this episode as a long list of requirements that have to be checked. This is just optional things you could do to up-level your videos if you wanted to. So with that being said, Marlena, go ahead and introduce yourself to us.
Well, thanks so much for having me here today. My name is Marlana Semenza, and I'm a photographer and visual strategist. And it's my job to help people frame the way they are seen and understood by their audience and their clients. So I create image content, and they use it to further their brand.
I can say Marlena does do wonderful work. And I haven't seen a ton of your work, but I know you worked with Elise Archer, who's a mutual
Yes.
friend of ours. And yeah, the content and the images you created for her were fantastic. So,
Well, thank you.
Marlena's background here is predominantly in photographs, not necessarily video, but of course, there's a lot of overlap between those two.
Right.
So, one of the first topics I have kind of on the list to bring up, but really in no particular order here, is when it comes to getting the lighting right in videos, or I guess, photos as well. What's kind of advice can you give people who are making video content for their lighting?
Well, once again, like you said, there's a lot of overlap, and lighting is lighting. And I am a firm believer in do what you can with as little as possible, because I don't believe in spending a lot of money on gear and things like that. What I would probably caution against is exactly what I'm doing, and that's relying strictly on natural light, only if you are creating a long video, because you want your lighting to be consistent throughout. And even during the course of this interview, you may see that light go in and out. So for a short video, that's fine, because you only have a short burst. And as a photographer, I use a lot of natural light because it's cheap, it's readily available, and I'm only dealing in fractions of seconds. But once you have a video that you're dealing with a little bit longer span, depending on how much it is, you may want something a little more consistent than that. Now, that said, facing a window is always good, because what happens is front light softens a lot. You can soften that light on your window even further by just hanging up a sheer curtain or anything like that. That'll help diffuse it. Also, too, the larger the light source, the softer the light. So you can't change the size of the window, let's say across the room. But if it's this big, that size is relative. So what you want to do is you want to get closer to it, because that makes the light source bigger.
Interesting.
If you do want to invest in lighting, the cheapest thing that you can probably invest in is something that's called a ring light. When you're dealing with lighting for video, some things you want to be aware of is you want things to be flicker free, once again for that consistency, and you also want to make sure that it doesn't have a fan, because a lot of photography lighting has a fan. You will pick all that up on video. So that's why I say a ring light, because they're inexpensive, they're flicker free. Usually you can get it so you can adjust it to either daylight or, to match other lighting, and they don't have a fan.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have the best, I certainly don't have the best lighting here in this room, right? But I have to contend with this really, really bright window, so I've
Mm-hmm.
closed the blinds to help with that.
Right.
But even with the blinds closed, I still had some backlight, so I have a little desk lamp here that I have
Mm-hmm.
pointed at the wall, and then it bounces off the wall and hits my face, and it works well enough.
And
So
see, that's an interesting point that you just brought up. You actually are bouncing it off the wall.
yeah.
When you're bouncing light off of another surface, it makes the light source bigger.
Yeah.
So that will also soften the light.
There we
So, and like I said, light is light is light. I don't really, it doesn't matter to me how you get it as long as you get it.
there we go. Cool. When it comes to camera angles and getting the right, angle for a video, what are some angles you can recommend, and of course, some angles to avoid?
I would say the only angle that I would say to avoid is shooting up. It's usually never a flattering look for anyone. And depending on, see, there's a whole psychology to angles, even in photographs. Uh, Generally speaking, if you are shooting up at someone at a very dramatic angle, it's to show power or strength or things like that.
Yep.
Once again, in a video, it depends. If it's just you talking, usually not a good look. And once again, like you said, a little bit higher than eye level is usually the best bet if you're using a phone. But play with your angles. And like I said, there's a lot of psychology that goes into angles depending on what you are trying to portray.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because the camera angle almost approximates where the other person's eyes are. So if the camera angle is really high, you appear small and short in comparison, and if the camera angle is really low, you appear very tall in comparison. Is that the idea?
Right. But also, too, another thing to keep in mind is that whatever is closest to camera gets bigger, and whatever is farther away gets smaller. And that's why you can look smaller, too, with if you have the camera up high, because your head is the closest thing to it, and your body becomes much smaller. If you have it low, the bottom half of you gets much bigger, and your head gets much smaller.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So if you, it's one of the things that I see a lot of women do wrong when they pose for a camera, and I'm talking still camera, is they'll put their hand on usually their hip and kick that hip forward, and what they just succeeded in doing is making that whole area look bigger. So, like I said, anything that you want to appear smaller gets pushed away from camera. So even if you're doing a still photograph, instead of shifting your hip to the hip closest to camera, shift it so it's on your back foot, and that'll help make you look
Yeah,
smaller.
that's interesting. All right. All right, so generally, somewhere around eye level is good,
Mm-hmm.
best as you can. I know that here, my little desk setup here, my work from home office, my laptop camera was like way, way too low. So I
Mm-hmm.
actually have my laptop sitting up on like a 4-inch high book right now. It's still a
Perfect.
little below eye level, but it's at least
Mm-hmm.
close enough.
Right.
Before it was like, you know, it was a bit rough.
Right.
The angle was crazy. All right, you talk about whoever's close to the camera, looks bigger and all that stuff. Kind of in that same vein, when you're taking these videos, how close to the camera should you be? I mean, even just us right now, so I'm fairly close. You pretty much just see my head, where for you, you're a bit further away and you can see the whole torso. So
Right.
is there
And
a
I think
best way to do? Go
I
ahead.
don't think it really matters. I think it depends on, your degree of comfort and also how you want to appear. I know if I'm not comfortable being that close to a video camera because then my head starts to look really big.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just a comfort level, I think.
No, it's still good though. So if that person doesn't like the way you look on camera, the answer might just be slide back a bit. Oh, wow, that's
Yeah.
a bit rough on the lighting,
You
but
do
yeah,
want to be engaging at least. So I don't want to be way back there talking to you.
yeah,
I think a rule of thumb was probably conversation distance.
I can see that. Yeah. I actually have heard it mentioned before that it's better to be just a little bit further back so that you can get more of your hands in there, right? Because you can communicate a lot with your hands, whereas if you're too close, right, hand movements are lost and it's just the head. So, all right, cool. So something about what you and I are is probably about
Now, I will say
happy
this
medium.
for women, especially if you are going to use your hands a lot, make sure that you don't have nail polish that is distracting and things like that. Because if you just see, I've had people show up with green nails or purple nails, or even if their nails are bright, bright red, it can be very distracting.
Oh, interesting. All right, good to know. All right, let's see. When it comes to colors, that's something that I've heard before that I never would have thought of in the past. But apparently, there's a real psychology behind colors, right?
Mhm.
Can you give us a brief breakdown of that whole world?
Um, there is, and you can actually Google this information. It'll give you a detailed breakdown. Usually, red is a power color, blue is trust, purple has always been the color of royalty, and so there are always little subtleties about it. But I would say for video, what you have to pay more attention to, other than color, is pattern. You don't want anything that is too busy because it will detract from you. And also, too, stripes can have a moire effect that you don't want. So I would say, in any way possible, stick to solids.
Interesting. All right. Solid colors. That makes sense. Yeah, there's a guy who I work with who has this like yellow and black striped shirt that every time he walks in the room, you feel like you're looking at one of those like illusion books you get as a kid where you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
holy crap, what's going on?
Yeah. And the thing is, you don't want, even in a headshot, you don't want anything to take away from here. You want it to be framed, but not distracting.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. So something that I know a lot of people get hung up on is their background, right? Um, and for this context, we'll just talk about the background, like at a home recording studio, generally a home office. In my case, a home guest bedroom, which has all sorts of board games on the wall. Um, how important do you think background is? And then, of course, what kind of advice can you give on getting a better background?
I I pay a lot of attention to it in photography, um, because once again, things can detract from what you're trying to accomplish. But right now, we have a whole new situation going on here. So the places that we may have originally been doing our videos or our photographs, things like that, it's a whole new normal, whatever that even means. But I would say keep them as simple as possible. And if, because you just don't want people to be thinking the whole time, well, what is that back there? You want them to be centered on what you're saying and what your message is. So that would be my biggest advice for that, is try and keep it simple. Also, you want to make sure that things aren't growing up out of your head, because that can be
Mhm.
very distracting.
So let's do a real-time critique here of my background. So the fan's okay, although if I position myself differently, then that could be a fan growing out of the head, right? So I'm
Correct.
good to put it there.
Mm-hmm.
The board games are probably a distraction, would you say? People are probably looking to see what I got on my shelf.
Um, I honestly would, if you really want a critique, I would clean them up, so they're more neatly positioned there. And if that's a closet over there, I would close that door.
Close the closet door. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I can see that. Awesome. All right. Yeah, because I think what you got is good, right? It's not so blank that it's boring, right? I do see a lot of videos on a plain white wall, and that's just a little bit too boring, I say.
Mm-hmm.
Where you at least have, some geometric shapes of the door and the photo. You got some flowers, but ultimately it's nothing to be distracting. So,
Yeah. And right
okay.
now I'm trying to cover a light
Oh,
fixture
yeah.
over there.
All right. Interesting. Cool. So, no distractions. Make sure there's no stuff growing out of your head. And yeah, that makes sense. All right. Um, what is your thought on having a plain white wall in the background? Is that better or worse than having, like I mentioned with you, a little bit of something, right?
I think it
Photos.
depends. I've seen a lot of what I'm going to refer to as talking head videos that if it's a plain white background, it's plain white background. Um, if I'm so concerned with the background, then I've missed the message and maybe it wasn't that riveting. So I don't know that I would get so hung up on it. If you can do a little something with it, even if it's just throw something up on the wall, I would do that. I steer away from the backgrounds that Zoom gives you and that type of thing. The reason being is when you move, pieces of you sometimes get lost.
Yep.
That's distracting to me.
Oh yes, very distracting. Yeah, those are fun sometimes for a live Zoom call, but yeah, I'm with you. I would never do that for a recorded video.
Right.
Not to mention, I don't know, it almost strips the realism off the piece. Like sometimes it's
Agreed.
nice to see a real person in a real environment and it almost
Agreed.
gives you context, right? Even me sitting in my, slightly messy guest bedroom here gives a little bit of context to the life I'm living.
Exactly.
So,
And also, too, things don't have to be perfect. What you were hearing come out of me is I also did a lot of set styling once upon a time.
mhm.
So that there are things that I inherently want to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do them. Like, for example, the fact that people are being seen in their environments and their environments aren't perfect, that's not necessarily a bad thing because then we get a little better glimpse into who you are and you become more relatable.
Yeah. I've always found that, I don't even know if I expressed this clearly, but the sensation of knowing someone, right, and knowing someone well, I think is primarily rooted in the variety of settings you've seen them in, right?
Mm-hmm.
The variety of physical settings, like at a baseball game, at work, at their house, even the variety of emotional settings, right? Sad, angry, happy, excited, discouraged. Like, the more variety you see somebody in, the more closely you feel like you know them. So, to an extent, allowing people to see my guest bedroom in the back here just allows them to feel like they know me better compared to if they
Agreed.
only ever saw me in a recording studio. So just adding that
Agreed.
extra layer, that variety in there can really help
Agreed.
people connect.
I agree.
On the note of locations, something that I really haven't given much thought to at all, but I understand that you do. When it comes to filming in external locations, right, like going away and picking somewhere, in the outside world to film, what are some of the considerations to keep in mind? First off, I guess before we get to any like the brand related stuff, what are just some practical considerations to keep in mind when, choosing an offsite location to film videos?
My biggest one would be noise.
Okay.
If you are in a really, really noisy environment, unless it's adding to the story you're telling, that's certainly a consideration. Um, Now, when you start to get into various locations, you also have to keep in mind, and this depends too on what you're bringing in, because a lot of locations won't let you bring a lot of gear. Now, if you're just filming yourself, picking your phone up and filming yourself, that's one thing. But there are locations that do not want me to bring lights and do not want me to bring a lot of extra things because that's also becomes a liability. Somebody could trip, someone could fall on some, you know, um, but there are permits involved a lot of the time. There can be fees involved, and also too, depending on what you are showing in the background, you also may have um, various legalities. For example, I can photograph in front of the Eiffel Tower all day long. The minute it turns nighttime and that light show goes on, all bets are off because that light show is copyrighted. So I need special permission for that.
Hmm.
Um, the Las Vegas Strip. I can show pieces to a degree, but if any particular hotel is too in the forefront, or you are seeing the strip, I believe, as the strip, once again, you run into copyright issues. So you kind of have to do a little bit of research because you don't want a lawsuit later on. And that's not to scare anybody, it's just to let you know that, hey, and even with things like laptops and certain shoes, those things can be copyrighted. And so you have to be very careful of how you're using them.
I never would have thought you could put copyright on taking pictures of things. Go figure.
Well, it's
Good to know.
objects. Yeah, it's objects.
Yeah. All right then. Well, if you live somewhere with, I guess, fairly, famous, prominent structures, do a quick Google search. Can
Yeah,
I take pictures of?
yeah,
Um, Interesting. All right. So you got to make sure you have permissions and permits, right? Depending on where you're going. Although it sounds like if you're not bringing any gear, you can probably fly under the radar in most cases. It's the
easily.
gear that really requires, that. Okay. Good to know. Um, when it comes to choosing the right location, like from a brand perspective, right? What are some things to keep in mind about the locations you choose?
Well, usually anytime that I work with someone, I do a deep dive into what their brand really is and what will enhance it and what won't. Um, so if you have, let's say, I have a client coming up and his story is partially coming from like, he grew up around car junkyards and things like that and fixing cars. So that location and that kind of location is going to be integral in the story that we tell for him. Um, but if you don't have a specific story, then I would just use things that will enhance what you are doing, or even places that you love can be a good thing. Let's say, because that gives you more insight into who you are. So let's say that you love, I don't know, gardens, and you do some images and things like that in gardens. You can speak to that because, once again, that allows people to get to know who you are as a person and more relatable.
Yeah. It just popped in my head this, on the same topic of external locations, particularly outdoor locations. Is there times of day that you should really be like outside doing shoots, and is there times of day you should really avoid an outside shoot because the sunlight and the angle is just going to cause you problems?
Yeah, usually you want to avoid the middle of the day.
Okay.
But that said, what you can do is you can also use what's called open shade. And you look for open shade when the sun is really harsh. You look for open shade by looking at the ground, and there will be a harsh line between the shade and the sunlight. So what you want to do is you want to be in the shade but facing out toward the sun, and it will you will see that it will give you some really beautiful light.
So when it comes to locations, another thing that just came to mind as we were talking, um, what do you see as the relative merits of consistency in location, right? To kind of establish, some more brand identity, right? Because you're consistently showing up the same places versus variety, partially because people tend to just find variety more interesting. But also, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes, seeing a person in a variety of settings can help you feel like you know them better. Do you see what outweighs the other, right? Is it more important to have brand consistency in your locations, or is it more important to have variety in your locations?
I would say it depends on what stories you're looking to tell.
Okay.
So it really depends on what your brand is and what people need to know, because at the end of the day, that's really what you're communicating, is what people need to know. And so it's really not about you, it's about your audience and telling them the story.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, I guess one last question on like, the visual aesthetic side of a video. What are some just basic makeup tips you can give for both men and women of how to make sure they look best on video?
Once again, it depends on lighting. Um, and I am not, disclaimer here, I am not a hairstylist, I am not a makeup artist. So my first suggestion would be, if you are going to have a professional shoot done, please hire one, because that will certainly make life much easier for everyone involved. For men, it's just a matter of, making sure that you're well groomed as you would be. So if you are normally clean shaven, be clean shaven, things like that. Sometimes don't be afraid of putting a little bit of powder on for shine. Um, as far as women go, if you start to get into real harsh video lighting, because the high-end video lighting can be very strong, you may want to go a little bit heavier on your makeup because you will get washed out. But once again, that's a lighting thing. So, and for most of us that are doing videos and using natural light or using a ring light, things like that, if you look good in front of a window with a mirror, then usually that's a pretty good indicator of, okay, I can get away with this. I wouldn't go, once again, too bright on lipsticks and things like that, because that's what I'm going to see first.
Yeah, cool. Um, so one thing that has come up just a little bit in this conversation, I'd like to spend some more time dwelling on is someone in my company refers to it as the, polish versus authenticity continuum, right? Where you tend to be either on one end of the spectrum or the other, where things are really well produced, well put together and professional, or things are very raw and real and just as they are. What's your preference generally for, where you'd like to fall on that polish versus authenticity continuum yourself? And then again, a recommendation for other people, things they should keep in mind.
I personally think that what you want to do is strike a good balance of both. Because if you come across as only slick and polished and professional all the time, I think it takes away from your relatability. But if you only show yourself coming up as, half a hot mess, then that can take away from some of your authority. So I think finding a balance is really where you want to sit. What I do not believe in is fake it till you make it. I believe what that does is it lends us to that whole imposter syndrome because we feel like we're constantly faking it. I think what we need to do is continually step forward, but have our steps forward be on solid footing and go toward the direction that we want and toward who we want to be and portray, and but make those steps very solid. And like I said, in between, because I saw a great photo recently of Jennifer Aniston, and it was a behind the scenes, and it was the people helping her get to this perfect look, and it was perfect. It was a great image, and it just the look on her face, everything made her so relatable.
Yeah. So when you're talking about finding balance, are you thinking by finding balance by consistently being in the middle, or are you talking about finding balance from, kind of having a variety of content pieces, kind of, I guess, go from different ends of the spectrum?
I think it's by going from different ends of the spectrum,
Okay.
because at the end of the day, most of my clients want to look like the best versions of themselves. But everybody wakes up with morning breath, and I'm not saying that you need to show all that, but these are the things that make us relatable because they are the things that are universally felt by everyone. So if you're walking around and you have, let's say, your favorite pair of slippers and they're holy, and you may want to show that at some point and talk to that, because there are other people that can relate to that. They don't constantly need to see you in your Louboutins.
Yeah. And even now, I think that kind of goes back to what came up earlier, right, of the variety. If people see you in a variety of contexts, they feel like they know you better. If they see your professional self dressed to the nines with best lighting and they see your, just getting ready for regular workday self, it helps create that sensation of knowing, liking, and trusting.
And also too, there's the interesting piece of it that if they are aspiring to be something and this is part of your message, then they need to be able to relate to the fact that, oh, okay, they've gone from here to here. So that's possible for me as well. So take them on the journey with you, because there is nothing more powerful than the story.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Something else that I'd be curious to hear your take on, right? Um, in a lot of settings, people are best off just doing their own videos, taking their own photos, right? Especially if you're talking about, creating content consistently for social media. It's just not practical to do anything other than, do it yourself. But in some settings, it might be better to have a professional. So you can speak both to the world of photography and videography, or one or the other. But when do you think someone that needs a professional versus when is it better for someone to just do it themselves?
Well, I can certainly speak to this on a photo end of it. I think if you want to take your brand to the next level and you want to create a consistent image and be looked at as professional and things like that, at some point you need to have professional photography. I don't believe that a strong personal brand is built on selfies and images that you take of yourself, but I do think that there's a place for them intermixed within your content. So I think, once again, it's striking the balance. And if when you work with a professional photographer, you can create a whole plan of what needs to be done and what images you need. And so this way, when you're out somewhere, you know what, this would be good for me to add, or I can photograph this because I've learned how to do it the correct way. Because that's another thing that I do too, is I will teach my clients a little bit of how to do it better. So when they are doing selfie type images or quick images on their own, they can at least do them better.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess just for a little bit of possible, I don't know, entertainment here, a little bit of a lighthearted topic. As you go through social media, now that you've been trained, right, and have so many years experience looking for the visual aesthetic side of things, is there some pretty common, consistent, like cringeworthy things you see on social media, either in photos or in videos?
I think the only cringeworthy things are things like posing, or lighting. Usually it's some kind of posing though.
Interesting. What do you mean by posing?
Um, just I there are things that you see that you'll never unsee, and I'll tell you one right now. There's a photographer named Sue Bryce, and she teaches this to not do this one thing because it looks like you're talking on the phone, and yet so many people do this, and it looks like you're talking on the phone. And now that you've seen it, you'll probably never unsee it anytime you see see somebody's image. And there are other things you can be doing with your hands other than this.
Yeah.
That's one of them.
Okay. Well, there. Now you pass that on to everyone else. They're going to see nothing but that. All right. Cool. Now this one here, I know that your area of expertise is photography, not necessarily video, but I'm just curious to hear your opinion. How do you see, partially as an inevitable advance of technology, partially because of the whole COVID crisis we're in right now, how do you see the role of video changing in, future years and for future generations?
I think it's going to get more and more important to do video and to be seen on video because even as you grow a personal brand, it makes you relatable. And now I can not just see you, but I can hear you. I can interact with you to some degree. That's why if you go back in the early ages of movies and things like that, why it was so powerful. It's why we relate and get so excited about different things on television because we can see them, we can hear them. We tend to believe that we know these people more. So I think it's always going to be important and only continue to get more and more so.
Yeah, almost the way I see it, right? Obviously, nothing will ever replace face-to-face interactions, and we'll always have those in our lives. But I believe going forward, there's going to be more and more digital interactions, right?
Right.
Whether, this COVID thing lasts a lot longer than we all expect, or whether there's, new novel viruses that hit us as a species, I think there's going to be a lot more digital interaction. And
Right.
to me, the only way to truly actually show up in a digital environment is through video, right? So whether it's,
Agreed.
in a Zoom meeting room or on social media, if you actually want to be seen, noticed, and heard and have people get to know you, you need to have video. So the modern equivalent of saying, I don't do video would be like the equivalent 100 years ago saying, I don't leave my house, because that's just
Right.
how you be seen. That's how you
Right.
show up. That's how you participate in the community. That's how you be known. That's how social interaction is done in the digital medium. So, and assuming the world moves more digital heavy, again, saying, I don't do video, it's not going to really be an option anymore, if you want to be seen
I
and be
was
known.
one of them. It took me a while to embrace video, but and the thing is, am I great on camera? No. You don't have to be great on camera. You just have to be you on camera. And I think Elise helped me a lot with that as well and leading by example.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Marlena. This is certainly a topic that I couldn't really speak well to myself, right? Because I'm very far on the authenticity side of that continuum. Just barely good enough is fine with me. So it was really nice having someone like you in here to kind of share some advice on how to, again, take those videos to the next level, take a good video and make it an even better video. So thank you so much.
Thank
One of the
you.
best ways for people to get in contact with you, whether they just want to get to know you or if they want your professional services.
Three ways. My website, which is marlenasemenza.com, or Instagram, marlena.semenza.photo, or LinkedIn. And you can just look for me there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.